Okay, so sometimes in the modern political debate, we can see sophistry on display in such a way there's no better example out there. And one of the things I want to look at is the current debate over building the wall. And there's one particular phrase I keep hearing over and over again that the left is using as their rebuttal. And they are saying, well, it won't work, or walls don't work. And that's it. There's no argument. They don't make a case. There's no evidence provided. And here a local Seattle celebrity, Donnie Bonaducci, who was the little kid on the Partridge Family show, he made that very word-for-word statement, it won't work. And he says it won't stop the drugs. They're going to either tunnel under it or they're going to get drug catapults and be launching drugs, apparently, from Mexico into the United States. And so this, what is actually a very small amount of money when you look at the national defense budget, it would be a waste, which is kind of a hard sell for the party of big spending. You know, building a wall is a shovel-ready job. I mean, you could get union workers. You could get all kinds of people employed. You can get these people paying taxes. You have a bigger tax base. It's almost everything that the left seems to want, except, of course, it is the wall. And unfortunately for its opponents, it is going to achieve exactly what it is supposed to achieve. Now, whenever there's a contentious debate of any sort, I find it useful to be able to break things down and look at the specific mechanics that are being put into use. And so I like to go to the list of fallacies. Anytime you start hearing rhetoric and you hear something that just sounds wrong, walls don't work. Well, naturally, walls do work, and you can provide that evidence. But it also helps to be able to put a name to what it is your opponent is doing. And I think in this case, saying walls don't work is one of these relevance fallacies called appeal to the stone. So to pull this up here, appeal to the stone is a logical fallacy that consists in dismissing a statement as absurd without giving proof of its absurdity. Appeal to the stone statements are fallacious because they fail to address the merits of the claim in dispute. The same applies to proof by assertion, where an unproved or disproved claim is asserted as true on no ground other than that of its truth having been asserted. The name of this fallacy, and this is kind of an amusing story here, but you can see how it is played out in other times here. The name of this fallacy is derived from a famous incident in which Samuel Johnson claimed to disprove Bishop Berkeley's immaterialist philosophy, that is, that there are no material objects, only minds and ideas in those minds, by kicking a large stone and asserting, "I refute him thus." This action, which is said to fail to prove the existence of the stone outside of the ideas formed by perception, is said to fail to contradict Berkeley's argument, and has been seen as merely dismissing it. And this appeal to the stone, I heard a similar case being made, if you remember, early in the election when Donald Trump was first running. And I heard people dismissing him, and they would make the statement, "He's clearly a buffoon," and offer no evidence. It just, they would make the statement, and it was, you could see it's very much the same category as walls don't work. Well, if you think about it, what is clearly a buffoon even made? It's one of those words that's made, it's a phrase that's supposed to shut down your thinking mind, and you go along with it. You say, oh yes, clearly a buffoon. But what does clearly a buffoon look like? I don't ever walk through the grocery store and see a man and say, well, that man is clearly a buffoon. I've never thought those words in my entire life. It's kind of a bizarre phrase when you think about it. Maybe with the exception of a Homer Simpson or a Fred Flintstone, there is no There's nobody that's clearly a buffoon, and in fact, Donald Trump is almost the opposite of a buffoon. Here you have a man with monosyllabic global name recognition. He is a real estate tycoon. He's worth $10 billion. He's gone out with some of the most beautiful women in the world. He's successful at everything he does. He has a successful television show. He was successful at running as president his very first time, which is more than I can say for the Libertarian Party. After all these decades, what have you done? Well, Donald Trump clearly is not a buffoon. And that is an example of an appeal to the stone. And in just the same way, saying walls don't work is nothing more than a logical fallacy, appeal to the stone. So one of the things you find when you have the truth on your side is you're able to make a coherent case. You're able to use logic, you're able to bring facts, you're able to bring evidence, and you don't resort to logical fallacies. Why would you? If walls didn't work, why not just make that case? Why not go through history and cite some examples? Provide some evidence that walls don't work. In fact, I would offer the opposite. Let's go with some of the most identifiable walls of all time. For example, the city of Troy. The walls of Troy, first erected in the Bronze Age between 3000 and 2600 BC, are its main defense. The fortifications display the importance of defense to the Trojans and how warfare is a prominent issue for ancient cities. The walls surround the city, extending for several hundred meters, and at the time they were built, they were over 17 feet tall. They were made of limestone with watchtowers and brick ramparts, or elevated mounds that served as protective barriers. Throughout all of the phases, the walls served as the largest fortification to protect the Trojans against their enemies. Defense mechanisms, like the walls of Troy, shed light on the larger topic of warfare in ancient times, which was a significant issue in ancient Greece and nearby locations such as Asia Minor. And with this wall, the Trojans were able to endure a 10-year siege of the city of Troy by some of the greatest heroes in all of humankind. Now, they had actually won the war. The Greek armies were in retreat, and they tried this last-ditch trick. And of course, as you know, the city only fell once they decided to drag the Trojan horse inside the walls, and thereby smuggling in enemy soldiers who opened the gates and just let everybody in. One of the other great, that's quasi-mythological. Some people doubt Troy, some people say there's evidence, but it really doesn't matter. We can see clearly the wall worked just fine until the front door was open. Another famous wall, the Great Wall of China, is a series of fortifications made of stone and brick and other materials built along an east-to-west line across the historical northern borders of China to protect the Chinese states and empires against the raids and invasions of various nomadic groups of the Eurasian steppe. Several walls were being built as early as the 7th century BC. These later joined together and made bigger and stronger are collectively referred to as the Great Wall. The Great Wall has been rebuilt, maintained, and enhanced over various dynasties. The majority of the existing wall is from the Ming dynasty. Apart from defense, other purposes of the Great Wall have included border controls, allowing the imposition of duties on goods transported along the Silk Road, regulation or encouragement of trade, and the control of immigration and emigration. Furthermore, the defensive characteristics of the Great Wall were enhanced by the construction of watchtowers, troop barracks, garrison stations, signaling capabilities through the means of smoke or fire, and the fact that the path of the Great Wall also served as a transportation corridor. Archaeological survey found the entire wall, with all of its branches, measures out to be 13,171 miles, significantly longer than what Trump has proposed. Today, the Great Wall is generally recognized as one of the most impressive architectural feats in history. So here we have an example in history, real life, we know it's there. There's a wall. It's controlling immigration. It's controlling goods, which you could say drugs, gangs, human smuggling, any of these things. A wall worked. We have an example. We can all see it. It's one of the most famous tourist attractions in the world. This is why appeal to the stone. It's such a ridiculous argument because just saying walls don't work and repeating that over and over again doesn't make it true. Now, you may, if you bring up the Wall of Troy or the Great Wall of China, get told, well, that was in old times. So look at a more current barrier, and it's the Israeli West Bank barrier or West Bank wall. It's a separation barrier in the West Bank along the Green Line. Israel considers it a security barrier against terrorism, while Palestinians call it racial segregation or apartheid wall. At a total length of 440 miles, the border traced by the barriers is more than double the length of the Green Line, with 15% running along it or in Israel, while the remaining 85% cuts at times 11 miles deep into the West Bank, isolating about 9% of it. The barrier was built during the Second Intifada that began in September 2000, very recently, and was defended by the Israeli government as necessary to stop the wave of violence inside Israel that the uprising had brought with it. The Israeli government says that the barrier has been effective, as the number of suicide bombings carried out from the West Bank fell from 73 between 2000 and July 2003, the completion of the first continuous segment, to 12, 73 down to 12 from August 2003 to the end of 2006. Sounds like it was well worth the investment. While the barrier was initially presented as a temporary security measure in a time of heightened tensions, it has since been rapidly associated with a future political border. The International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion stating that the barrier is a violation of international law. Well, that's interesting. You know, there's walls, there's fences all over the world. Mexico has a fence with its southern border. You got to look at how these rules are applied because it's definitely not evenly. A little more on the effectiveness here. Suicide bombings have decreased since the construction of the barrier. Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, Hamas, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have been less able to conduct attacks in Israel, which have decreased in areas where the barrier has been completed. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Israeli Security Agency report that in 2002, there were 452 fatalities from terrorist attacks. Before the completion of the first continuous segment from the beginning of the Second Intifada, 73 suicide bombings were carried out from the West Bank, killing 293 Israelis and injuring over 1,900. After the completion of the first continuous segment through the end of 2006, there were only 12 attacks, based in the West Bank, killing 64 and wounding 445, which is still too many, but we're going from 293 people being killed to 64. We're going from 73 attacks down to 12, and we're going from 1,900 wounded down to 445. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs predicts that completion of the barrier will continue to prevent terrorist attacks, since an absolute halt in terrorist activities has been noticed in the West Bank areas where the fence has been constructed. Israeli officials, quoted in the newspaper Maariv, have said that in the areas where the barrier was complete, the number of hostile infiltrations has decreased to almost zero. Maariv also stated that Palestinian militants including a senior member of Islamic Jihad, had confirmed that the barrier made it much harder to conduct attacks in Israel. Even the terrorists are saying that walls work, that walls make it harder to be a terrorist. Since the completion of the fence in the area of Tulkarm in Wallachia in June 2003, there have been no successful attacks from those areas. All attacks were intercepted or the suicide bombers detonated prematurely. In a March 23, 2008 interview, Palestinian Islamic Jihad leader Ramadan Shalad complained to the Qatari newspaper Al-Sharq that the separation barrier limits the ability of the resistance. Well, that's an interesting phrase to use. It limits the ability of the resistance to arrive deep within Israeli territory to carry out suicide bombing attacks, but the resistance has not surrendered or become helpless and is looking for other ways to cope with the requirements of every stage of the Intifada. So there's other factors cited as causes for the decline. Concluded the fence does make it harder for terrorists, but the attacks in 2005 decreased due to an increased pursuing of Palestinian militants by the Israeli armor and intelligence organizations. So there are the facts, and the evidence is pretty indisputable. And I was thinking about this, and I was wondering, how is it people can go around and just parrot this rhetoric, saying something as nonsensical as walls don't work? And I realized one of the ways they get you to do this is through conditioning. They get you to take that first step. They get you to say something that you know is untrue. It's like the earlier video I did on the Chain of Command Star Trek episode, where Picard is being tortured, and they keep trying to get him to say there are 5 lights when he can clearly see there's only 4. And I thought these are kind of a psyops when you look at things like Bruce Jenner is a brave, beautiful woman. Well, they attack anyone that goes against that narrative. So they get people acclimated to just going along with whatever the powers that be say is true, and that's what they repeat. That's how this argument to the stone is supposed to work. They just make the statement, well, Donald Trump wants a wall. Well, walls don't work. You're just conditioned not to argue. Because if the statement is really true that walls don't work, why not just let them build it if it isn't going to do anything in the first place? And we all know the answer, and it's because walls do work.